40 million people gone. Not from plague, not from famine, not from some slow, creeping catastrophe that history could shrug off as inevitable. From one man who was born with a blood clot clenched in his fist and spent his entire life proving that was an omen, not a coincidence. His name, before history polished it into legend, was Temujin, and if you had met him as a child, starving, abandoned, sleeping on frozen steppe, with nothing but a dead father and a terrified family, you would never have bet a single copper coin on his survival. You would have been catastrophically wrong, because Temujin didn't just survive, he rewired the entire world. He shattered every kingdom between the Pacific Ocean and the Caspian Sea, built an empire so vast it made Rome look like a city-state, and left a demographic scar so deep that geneticists are still measuring it 800 years later. This is the story of how the most dangerous man who ever lived became exactly that, and what it cost the world for him to do it. If this kind of deep-dive historical documentary is what you're here for, hit subscribe right now. We go places most channels won't. Let's start at the very beginning, and the beginning is brutal. The year is 1162. The Mongolian steppe is not the romantic wilderness that painters like to imagine. Rolling hills, golden grass, noble horsemen silhouetted against a dramatic sky. The reality is harsher. It is wind that strips the skin from your face in winter. It is summers that bake the earth into cracked plates. It is a world with no cities, no roads, no written language, no central authority. Just dozens of feuding tribal confederations locked in an endless, grinding cycle of raid, revenge and counter-raid. Into this world, Temujin is born to Yesugei, a minor Mongol chieftain of the Borjigin clan. His mother, Holun, was herself kidnapped from another tribe on her wedding journey to a different husband. That's how marriage worked out here. You wanted a wife, you raided for one. Temujin enters the world, according to the secret history of the Mongols, the only near-contemporary account we have, clutching a blood clot the size of a knucklebone in his right fist. The shamans look at this and see a warrior. They are not wrong. His early childhood is, by the standards of anyone reading this in a comfortable chair, almost incomprehensibly difficult. At around age 9, Yesugei takes Temujin to find a bride, because on the steppe, you betroth your children young, leave them with the bride's family to build loyalty, and come back later. Yesugei finds a suitable girl, Berte from the Ongarat tribe. He leaves Temujin there and rides home alone. He never makes it. On the road, he stops to eat with a group of Tatars, the tribe that, as it happens, his own clan has been feuding with for years. They recognize him. They poison his food. By the time Yesugei reaches his own camp, he's already dying. Temujin is summoned home. His father is dead before the boy even arrives. And here is where the story becomes truly extraordinary, because what happens next doesn't produce a broken child. It produces a predator. The Borjigin clan, with their chief dead and his successor, a 9-year-old boy, makes a calculation. They abandon the family, every single one of them. They ride away, leaving Holun and her children, Temujin and his brothers, and one adopted son, alone on the steppe with almost no livestock, no food stores, and the Mongolian winter bearing down like a hammer. Holun does not collapse. She digs roots. She catches fish with a bone needle. She feeds her children on pine nuts and wild garlic. She keeps them alive through sheer, ferocious will. And Temujin watches all of this, absorbs it, and learns the first great lesson of his life. Loyalty is a transaction, and when it fails, you survive anyway. The family scratches out a few years of this marginal existence, and then it gets worse. Temujin has a half-brother named Begta, older, domineering, who starts asserting authority over the family's food and resources. One day, over the theft of a lark and a minnow, genuinely over a bird and a fish, Temujin and his full brother Kasar ambush Begta and shoot him with arrows while he kneels in the grass, not running, accepting his fate with strange dignity. Temujin is perhaps 13. He has just committed fratricide over a meal. His mother screams at him with a fury that the secret history records in extraordinary detail, comparing him to a lion, a snake, a monster. He listens. He does not apologize. He has learned something about resource competition that will define his entire military philosophy for the rest of his life. Shortly after, the Tai-Chute clan, a rival Mongol group, decides that young Temujin is already dangerous enough to be worth capturing. They raid the camp, take him prisoner, and clamp him in a wooden collar called a kangwei, a plank across the shoulders and neck that makes it nearly impossible to sleep, eat properly, or move freely. Shortly after, the Tai-Chute clan, a rival Mongol group, decides that young Temujin is already dangerous enough to be worth capturing. They raid the camp, take him prisoner, and clamp him in a wooden collar called a kangwei, a plank across the shoulders and neck that makes it nearly impossible to sleep, eat properly, or move freely. Now a young man, he goes back to claim Berthe, his childhood betrothed still waiting for him with the Ongeret tribe. They marry, and almost immediately catastrophe strikes again. The Merkits, another steppe tribe, raid their camp in revenge for the old abduction of Hoelun. Yesugei had taken Hoelun from a Merkit man after all. These grudges ran in cycles. They take Berthe. They give her to one of their men as a wife. Temujin is devastated, and then he is calculating. He goes to two men, Togrul, the powerful leader of the Karaits, and an old blood brother of his dead father, and Jamuka, his own childhood best friend. Perhaps something more than a friend. The sources are ambiguous. Together, the three of them raise a war party and smash the Merkits. Berthe is recovered. She is pregnant. Temujin names the child Jochi, guest, and raises him as his own, never publicly questioning the boy's paternity, though the shadow follows Jochi his entire short, tragic life. This is the moment Temujin begins to rise. He has demonstrated that he can call in allies, plan a campaign, execute a raid, and win. On the steppe, that is everything. Warriors start to come to him. Not many at first, but the trickle is beginning. To understand what Temujin builds next, you need to understand how Mongol society worked, because he's about to smash it completely and rebuild it in his own image. Traditional Mongol tribal structure was organized around kinship. You were loyal to your clan, your blood. The chief of your clan was the chief because of his lineage, not necessarily his competence. You raided other clans, traded captives, built alliances through marriage, and the whole system spun in a chaotic, violent equilibrium that had basically been running unchanged for centuries. The problem with this system, as Temujin understood intimately having been abandoned by his own clan at 9 years old, was that it was brittle. Kinship loyalty was conditional. The moment the strong man died, the structure collapsed. So Temujin builds something different. He begins promoting men not based on blood, but based on ability and demonstrated loyalty. A slave who saves your life gets promoted. A general who wins a battle gets rewarded with plunder and authority. A man who betrays his previous master to join you. Well, that's interesting. Temujin's response to defectors who come to him having betrayed their previous lord is counterintuitive. He usually kills them, because a man who betrays one master will betray another. What he wants is men who are loyal because they believe in him, not merely men who are switching to the winning side. This is one of the most psychologically sophisticated things any leader of the ancient or medieval world ever did, and it works. His reputation for rewarding loyalty absolutely and punishing betrayal absolutely spreads across the steppe like fire through dry grass. His alliance with Jamuka, however phrasy, the two men are too similar, and not similar enough. Both are brilliant. Both are ambitious. Jamuka believes in the old system of aristocratic lineage. He is, himself, of high birth. Temujin is building something meritocratic and tribal identity transcending, and Jamuka can see exactly where this is going. They separate. They gather their own followings, and then, in 1190, they fight, the Battle of Dalan Baljut. Jamuka wins. He celebrates by boiling 70 of Temujin's officers alive in cauldrons. This is not just cruelty. It's a message. Temujin files it away. The next decade is a grind of coalition building, backstabbing, and incremental warfare across the steppe that would take 3 episodes to fully unpack. The short version, Temujin allies with Togrul against the Tatars, helps destroy them, absorbs their warriors into his own force, then eventually turns on Togrul himself when the Karait leader grows suspicious of his protégé's expanding power. By 1204, Temujin has destroyed the Naimans, the Merkits, the Tatars, the Karaites, and the Tai-Chutes. Jamuka, his old friend, his old enemy, is finally captured and brought before him. Temujin offers him mercy. Jamuka refuses. He asks only to be killed without bloodshed, a death befitting a noble, strangling or neck-breaking rather than the sword. Temujin grants this. He watches his oldest rival die and perhaps feels something complicated about it. The secret history doesn't say, but it records the moment with the kind of weight that suggests even the people writing it understood something significant had passed. 1206, the Onon River, spring, The ice is breaking and the steppe grass is coming green, and every surviving Mongol chief and chieftain and warrior of consequence is gathered on the banks for a great Kurultai, an assembly. They raise a white banner of 9 yak tails, the standard of a great Khan, and they give Temujin a name that has echoed through 8 centuries since, Genghis Khan. Approximately, universal ruler, or, more evocatively in some translations, fierce ruler, or simply the Khan of Khans. He is around 44 years old. He has been fighting for survival since he was 9, and the fighting from this point forward is no longer about survival. It is about conquest. And the scale of what happens next is difficult to process with human intuition. Genghis immediately sets about reforming his new empire with the same systematic genius he applied to building it. He creates the yasa, a code of laws, some derived from existing steppe custom, some entirely new. Theft is punishable by death. Adultery, death. Deceiving the Khan, death. But also, freedom of religion across the empire. No taxation for clergy of any faith. Promotion based on merit. He abolishes the kidnapping of women as a path to marriage. Ironic, given how his own family came together, but also coldly practical. Kidnapping created the endless revenge cycles that kept the steppe tribes fragmented. He wants unity, not blood feuds. He restructures his army on a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, the Tumen. Commanders are appointed by him, not by inheritance. The entire army is structured to be commanded by a single will. His, transmitted through a hierarchy of personally loyal officers. This is not how anyone else in the world is running their armies right now. Europe is doing feudal levies. China is doing bureaucratic conscript armies with divided command. The Mongol army is something new. A professional, meritocratic, supremely mobile force that can operate in columns across hundreds of miles of steppe, communicate via relay riders, the YAM system, and converge on a target with a precision that contemporaries describe repeatedly and in language edged with awe as supernatural. The first major external target is the Xixia, the Tangut kingdom in what is now northwestern China. Why the Xixia first? Partly because they're relatively weak, partly because they control access to the Silk Road, and partly because Genghis is still learning how to break cities, which is a fundamentally different problem than breaking steppe armies. The Mongols are nomads. They have never built a siege engine in their lives. They can ride forever. They can live on dried meat and mare's blood during campaign. They are almost impossible to catch in the open field. But walls? Walls are not something you can outmaneuver. The Xixia hide behind their city walls and wait for the Mongols to get bored and leave. And for a while this works. Genghis withdraws, returns, withdraws again. He watches. He recruits. He captures Chinese engineers who know how to build catapults, mangonels, and fire-lance weapons. He integrates them into his army the way a modern military integrates new technology, not as curiosities, but as core capabilities. By the time he comes back to the Xia for the 3rd time, he has a siege train. The Xia submit in 1210. They become tributaries. They are not yet destroyed. That comes later, in a moment of Mongol rage that will leave the entire region depopulated for a generation. But for now, they are useful, and Genghis moves to the next target, the Jin dynasty, northern China, the most powerful state in East Asia, with a population somewhere around 50 million people, a professional army of hundreds of thousands, the most sophisticated military technology on Earth, and walls. Lots and lots of walls, including large sections of what we now call the Great Wall. This should be impossible. The Jin have cavalry. They have siege engineers far more experienced than anything the Mongols have captured so far. They have fortified cities strung across the landscape like a necklace of stone. And they have, for decades, played the various steppe tribes against each other specifically to prevent the kind of unified Mongol power that Genghis has just created. They are too late. The thing they were trying to prevent has already happened. Genghis invades in 1211. What follows is not a battle. It is a campaign, sprawling, multi-pronged, lasting years. The Mongols cannot take every city by storm, so they develop a system. Offer surrender first. Always offer surrender first. If you surrender, your lives are spared, your merchants are protected, your religious leaders are exempt from taxation, your skilled workers are absorbed into the Mongol system. If you resist, If you make the Mongols bleed for your walls, then when those walls fall, what happens next is not conquest, it is annihilation. Not always, not uniformly, but with enough consistency that the threat is credible. And the threat works. City after city, the logic calculates out in favour of surrender. The ones that don't surrender, and there are some, brave or foolish or simply without a choice, become cautionary tales that are repeated across the continent for the next generation. By 1215, the Mongols have sacked Zhongdu, the Jin capital, roughly modern Beijing. The Jin emperor flees south. The destruction is catastrophic. A Persian traveller who passes through years later describes the plain around the city as white with human bones, the smell of rot lingering in the air like something that has become part of the landscape itself. Genghis doesn't stay to consolidate. He extracts tribute, takes engineers and administrators, and turns his attention west. Because west is where the next great story begins, and it begins with a diplomatic incident that, even by the standards of Mongol history, has a kind of dark operatic absurdity about it. The Khwarezmian Empire, Shah Muhammad II. In 1218, he controls everything from Persia to the borders of India, a massive, wealthy, sophisticated empire with major cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench. Genghis, at this point, is not necessarily looking for war with the Khwarezmians. He sends a trade caravan, 450 merchants, Muslim traders, carrying Mongol goods westward to open commerce. Shah Muhammad has the caravan seized and the merchants executed. He accuses them of being spies. Maybe some of them were. It doesn't matter. Genghis sends a diplomatic envoy to demand explanation and restitution. Muhammad has the envoy's beard shaved off, a profound humiliation in this culture, and sends him back. Then Muhammad executes the secondary envoys. This is the moment. This is the diplomatic miscalculation that causes Genghis Khan to turn the full weight of his now formidable military machine westward, not toward a border skirmish, but toward total annihilation of the Khwarezmian state. Historians have spent centuries debating whether Muhammad understood what he was inviting. The evidence suggests he didn't. He had heard of the Mongols. He knew they were powerful. He did not understand that he was, in the words of one Mongol commander later quoted, lighting a fire beneath the world. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, 1219 to 1221, is the event that transforms Genghis Khan from a great conqueror into a figure of apocalyptic historical weight. The numbers are contested, they always are, but the demographic collapse of Central Asia in this period is archaeologically and textually documented as one of the most severe population disasters of the medieval world. Genghis divides his army, a risk but a calculated one, and drives it at the Khwarezmian Empire from multiple directions simultaneously. The Shah's strategy is to spread his forces across his many fortified cities, assuming the Mongols cannot take them all. This is, again, a catastrophic miscalculation. The Mongols don't need to take every city in sequence. They cut the lines of communication between cities, isolate garrisons, and then deal with each in turn. Shah Muhammad, stripped of the ability to coordinate his own defense, disintegrates as a military leader. He flees, then he flees again. Then he dies on a small island in the Caspian Sea, reportedly wrapped in a borrowed shirt because he had nothing left. Pursued to the end by a Mongol flying column that Genghis had specifically detached from the main army, with standing orders, do not let him escape. He escaped, barely, and only by dying first. Meanwhile, the cities fall. Bukhara, one of the great centres of Islamic learning, a city of scholars and mosques and libraries, falls in 1220. Genghis rides into the Congregational Mosque and asks if this is the palace of the Sultan. He is told it is the house of God. He mounts the pulpit and delivers what witnesses describe as a speech, a theological statement of Mongol cosmology. He has been sent, he says, as the punishment of God. If the people had not committed great sins, or God would not have sent a punishment like him, then his soldiers strip the mosque of its valuables, feed the Quran manuscripts to their horses as fodder, and use the building as a stable. This is not accidental desecration. It is a message delivered with chilling precision. The old order is over. Samarkand falls. Urgench falls, though that one cost the Mongols significantly more blood, and the city's destruction is correspondingly more complete. The great irrigation systems of the region, the qanats and canals that have sustained Central Asian agriculture for 1,000 years, are destroyed, either deliberately or as collateral damage. Populations collapse. Cities that had supported hundreds of thousands become villages. Some never recover. While the Western campaigns are grinding the Khwarezmian Empire into dust, Genghis sends his two best generals, Gebel and Sube'etei, on what has to be described as the most audacious military reconnaissance in history. He tells them, go west, find out what's there. They go. They ride through the Caucasus. They defeat a coalition of Georgian and Armenian forces. They cross the Caucasus Mountains in winter, something nobody in the region thinks is possible. They emerge onto the Pontic steppe, defeat the Cumans and their Rus allies at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, a disaster for the Rus princes, several of whom are captured and suffocated under boards that the Mongols use as a banquet table while they celebrate above. Then Gebel and Sube'etei ride back to report to Genghis. They have just circumnavigated the Caspian Sea and looped through more territory than most medieval European armies ever travelled in a lifetime. This is not a campaign. It is a proof of concept. It is the Mongols saying to themselves, we can go anywhere, and they mean it. Back in the east, the Shisya, the same Tangut kingdom that submitted to Genghis back in 1210, have been less than perfectly cooperative tributaries. They were supposed to send troops when Genghis called them for the Western campaigns. They refused. The Shisha king reportedly told the Mongol ambassador that if Genghis couldn't fight his own battles, he didn't deserve to be Khan. This is the worst thing anyone has ever said to Genghis Khan, which is saying something given the competition. Genghis begins planning the final Shisha campaign. He is now in his 60s, old by any steppe standard, ancient by warrior standards. He is not well. He had taken a fall from his horse years earlier, and there are signs in the sources: fatigue, illness, a body that has been pushed through 50 years of campaign life, that he is dying. He knows it. He campaigns anyway. The Shisha campaign of 1226 to 1227 is systematic and final. City after city is taken, this time with no offer of future tributary status. The Shisha had their chance. They wasted it. Genghis gives the order that the Shisha royal line is to be exterminated. The culture, the language, the written records of the Tangut people, so thoroughly destroyed by what follows that the Shisha remain one of history's great mystery civilizations, known mostly through what their conquerors recorded and what archaeologists have scraped from buried sites in the Gobi. In the summer of 1227, Genghis Khan dies. Where exactly and from what is disputed. Some sources say the fall from the horse years before had caused internal injuries that eventually proved fatal. Some say illness. Some say he was struck by a Xizya arrow. A Mongol tradition, probably apocryphal, says a captured Xizya queen killed him by biting him during his assault on her. The secret history is frustratingly vague on this point, recording the fact of his death but not its circumstances. He dies on campaign, in the field, which is exactly where he would have wanted it. He is 60 or 65 years old. He has spent his entire adult life in motion. Now let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers are the part of the Genghis Khan story that modern audiences often can't quite hold in their heads. The estimate of 40 million dead, the number in our title, comes from historical demographers studying the population curves of the regions the Mongols conquered. The Mongol campaigns across Asia, the Middle East and into Europe between 1206 and the mid-1300s caused, by the best scholarly estimates, somewhere between 30 and 40 million deaths, some directly through violence, many more through the famine, disease and infrastructure collapse that followed conquest. This is roughly 10% of the entire human population of the world at the time. To put that in proportion, if you killed 10% of the world's population today, you would be killing about 800 million people. These numbers are contested. They always are in demographic history. Some scholars argue they are too high. Others argue they are too low, particularly for specific regions like the Iranian plateau, where some estimates suggest populations declined by 70 to 90% in certain areas. The archaeological record, burned cities, abandoned irrigation works, skeletal mass graves, supports the conclusion that the devastation was genuinely, staggeringly severe. Genghis Khan's campaigns rank, by most demographic analyses, as one of the 3 or 4 worst man-made disasters in human history by mortality, as a percentage of world population. The Black Death killed more people in absolute terms. The Mongol conquests may have killed a higher percentage, and yet, here is the part that makes the Genghis Khan story genuinely complicated, rather than simply monstrous. The Mongol Empire, at its peak, achieved not by Genghis himself but by his successors, becomes the largest contiguous land empire in human history. It connects, for the first time in a single political framework, China, Central Asia, Persia, Russia, and chunks of Eastern Europe. And within this empire, the Mongols enforced something historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Trade routes that had been dangerous, fragmented, and constantly interrupted by local political chaos become, under Mongol administration, the most active commercial highways in the medieval world. Merchants travel from Venice to Beijing. Ideas cross the continent. The Black Plague, tragically, crosses the continent in the other direction, which is one of the grimmer ironies of the Mongol peace. Technologies transfer. Paper money, developed in China, reaches the Islamic world. Military technologies move, agricultural techniques move, and the empire's insistence on religious tolerance creates, in certain regions and periods, an environment of intellectual pluralism that is genuinely remarkable for its time and place. Whether this calculus, tremendous destruction followed by period of connectivity, represents some kind of historical justice is a question that historians tend to avoid answering directly. It is perhaps genuinely unanswerable. The cities that were destroyed would have traded. The scholars who were killed would have written. The children who were not born because their parents were killed would have been born. You cannot credit Genghis Khan with the benefits of his empire without also crediting him with its costs, and the costs are written in tens of millions of human lives. There is one more piece of the legacy that tends to get left out of the documentary versions of this story: genetics. In 2003, a team of geneticists published a paper in the American Journal of Human Genetics examining a specific Y chromosome lineage found across a vast swathe of Asia, from the Pacific coast to the Caspian Sea. They found that approximately 16 million men then living carried this lineage, a single male ancestor, roughly 800 years ago, whose descendants had spread with extraordinary efficiency across the continent. The researchers identified this lineage with high probability as descending from Genghis Khan and his close male relatives. This is not because Genghis Khan was unusually virile by the standards of medieval rulers. He had perhaps a dozen acknowledged wives and an unknown number of concubines, which was not exceptional for a great king of his era. It is because his sons and grandsons, ruling an empire that stretched across a continent, had the same access to women that he did, multiplied across 4 generations of Mongol imperial power. The genetic footprint of the Mongol conquests is, literally, written into the DNA of 1 in every 200 men alive today. This is a fact that tends to produce a particular kind of silence when people really sit with it. So what do we make of Genghis Khan? The man who was abandoned at 9 and built the largest empire the world has ever seen. The man who instituted religious freedom and free trade across a continent while ordering the annihilation of entire civilizations. The man who elevated slaves to generals and treated the surrender of cities as a form of mercy, while making the consequences of resistance so catastrophic that the word spread for centuries. The man who died on campaign in the field, having never stopped moving from the moment he was born, and left behind a world so thoroughly reshaped that the political geography of Asia still bears his fingerprints. He is not reducible to a villain. He is also not reducible to a hero. He is something rarer and more unsettling in history, a force, a human force with human origins, abandonment, cold, hunger, betrayal, grief, that somehow accumulated enough momentum to run over the medieval world like a geologic event. The step that made him is still there. The grass still grows in spring. The wind still comes down off the mountains with enough force to drive tears from your eyes before you can blink. And somewhere under 8 centuries of accumulation, sediment, politics, language, border changes, the slow grinding of time, the echo of hoofbeats that once shook every throne from the Yellow Sea to the Danube still resonates, if you know how to listen for it. Temujin, the boy with the blood clot in his fist, the man who remade the world, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, the punishment of God, the largest empire, 40 million dead, 16 million descendants. History doesn't give us many figures like this, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. If you made it this far, you already know this channel is worth subscribing to, or you so do it. Next time, we go deeper into the Mongol machine, the generals, the campaigns, the brilliant, terrifying military system that made all of this possible. The story is far from over.